To- Hi, everybody. We are live. I'm super excited. I have known Mercedes for a little while now. I think it's been like, what, 6 years, Mercedes? Like, it
Yeah.
was as we were starting Female Founder Collective. So I'm very excited to be back with you today. I'm just putting my do not disturb on so I don't have text messages going while we're doing this. To get to dig in with a number of questions that our founders had for you. But before I do, I wanted to quickly remind everybody we are about to be going live with our tech cohort, which is so exciting. So if you're in femtech, if you're in prop tech, if you are really in any kind of tech company that you're building, maybe you have a SaaS model, or most likely you have a SaaS or B2B model, this is the right place for you. The 10th house is our private membership community where we come together to really share resources that will help us grow and scale our businesses on everything from things like fundraising and putting together the perfect cap table to the perfect pitch deck to how to scale and grow your business and create a great model that will help you continue to be sustainable in your growth. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce Mercedes for those who do not know her. She was most recently a partner at Lightspeed for 5.5 years, leading investments in consumer, in fintech, crypto, and SaaS. And she was named one of the 9 rising stars in venture capital by the Wall Street Journal and has invested in multiple early stage companies doing 300 million in ARR. And prior to Lightspeed, she was a GM at General Assembly, where she helped grow its revenue from 2 million to 100 million in 4 years. I didn't realize that stat. That's crazy. That's amazing. And worked at Goldman Sachs as an analyst. So I'm going to jump in and really start with sort of the theme of founder to funder and how operating has really shaped how you look at your investments. So you've worn nearly every hat across startups, including product and ops, customer success, sales. Which of these experiences most influences how you feel like you evaluate founders now?
Thank you so much for having me, Ali. It's great to reconnect. And yeah, wow. I did operating for 7 years before I became a venture capitalist, and I used to work in finance before that. It's hard to pick one discipline that best resonates, but I think generally the world of building a business really falls into 2 camps. You're either building the product or you're selling the product. And so I really bifurcate all of my various roles into those 2 experiences.
Yeah.
I think that the longer I've been an investor, the more I believe that distribution is the key and the answer. I think it's table stakes to build a beautiful product people love. That's just the admittance requirement for even being able to have a startup. And I think that's where a lot of first time founders focus, is making this great, beautiful product. But if you can't get it in the hands of people, then maybe you're kind of shouting in the forest, like the tree fall if no one heard it. And
Yeah.
so I think when I think back on my lessons over time, it's a lot of my actually go-to-market experience that I end up leaning on and spending time with founders. And there's so many different types of go-to-market. I mean, you have pure D2C products where it's product-led growth and it's virality and it's influencer-led marketing. And then I also work with enterprise sales startups where it's outbound prospecting, consultative sales. And then I've also worked at startups where it's inbound and the calls are ringing off the phone and you have to be the one who's triaging and figuring out how to prioritize who to actually spend time with. So I've done a lot of different types of kind of the go-to-market function. All of those roles I did in operating. And I think I'll have to maybe cheat a little bit on your answer and just say all of those roles that were go-to-market oriented. But I do love product. I really love making a retentive product as well.
Can I ask, like, maybe an obvious question? People might know what this is, but can you talk a little bit more about what go-to-market is? Like, how do you define go-to-market as an operator and as an investor, like looking at companies and seeing if they have a good go-to-market strategy?
Yeah, I think of go-to-market as all of the organizational functions that are designed to get your product in users' hands. And so that can mean everything from classic marketing, which is really top of funnel awareness.
Yeah.
SEO could fall into go to market as well because of, as you know, a lot of the new chatbot SEO optimization and advertising tools that are AI native. Those are also in kind of the go to market function. So from marketing, top of funnel, all the way to awareness, that's awareness, and then to consideration, and eventually through the funnel, all the way down to the point of sale and actually getting someone to check out and close. So most people wouldn't put like fintech solutions in go to market, but I do think checkout solutions fall into go to market because they're a sign of how well you're optimizing and converting your user funnel. So everything across that stack, everything, it used to be in like the last generation, we would be talking about website conversion. And I think in today's generation, we're going to be talking about agent conversion and chatbot conversion for the AI native companies. But that's what I mean by go to market.
Super helpful. And then what is something, Mercedes, that you maybe believed as a founder that when you became an investor, you found that is not true? Or maybe something, even if you don't have something that you believed as a founder, that you see a lot of founders believe about investors, that is in fact not true.
There's so many. Okay, well, one of them I stated earlier, which is like product is the answer. It's definitely product plus distribution, which includes like the sales, ops strategy too. I'd say another one, something I used to believe. A very long time ago, maybe like 10 years ago, I used to believe that you're supposed to put together a business plan, and then you would like literally send a written document of like a Word document of your plan to an investor, and that's how we would fundraise. That is definitely not how fundraising happens. I used to also believe that fundraising was maybe harder for the early stage companies that didn't have traction and metrics. But I actually now think the opposite, which is counterintuitive. I think companies with traction and metrics a lot of times have a harder time raising than companies without, because when you don't have any metrics yet, you're raising on hope. And so you can raise a lot of money on hope and vision if you're a good enough storyteller.
I want you to keep going on this because I think this is so fascinating. And I think we could have a whole series about like myth busting with VC. But I do want to ask you more questions about that, what you just said, because I think a lot of founders will ask about that. And that's that, should I raise without having generated any revenue, like if I'm pre-revenue, or should I wait until after? The challenge is, particularly for consumer product companies, now you have to have a certain amount of traction before it seems to be this way. I don't know if this is true, but it seems that you have to have a certain amount of revenue annually. Like right now, it seems to be like around $1 million in ARR before somebody will even look at you. So would you say that that's like consumer products are an outside case, and really for tech, it's more about the opportunity? When do investors start looking at businesses that are pre-revenue?
So it's a good question. I think it really depends where you fall into, I'm just going to be very frank, like the pedigree, quote unquote, of founders, because this is a real topic a lot of people don't want to talk about, but your perceived pedigree is going to largely dictate a lot of how easy your fundraising is. It's not fair. That's just kind of the reality. So when I'm talking about it's easier to raise on hope and vision, I'm talking about a group of founders that have already worked at what is considered a hot, startup, a hot tech startup, a hot AI startup that are, and I'm based in San Francisco, so I'm talking from a Silicon Valley centric perspective as well. And I don't think this is true across the whole country. But if you've worked at the places that have been deemed the talent hubs, an OpenAI or a Stripe or a Robinhood from the last generation, one of these kind of fast growing companies that made a big impact, then you don't have to worry as much about traction because you're going to be considered a pedigreed founder. Now, for everybody else, for the rest of us, it's going to be a little bit different. And that's where I think one thing founders that we do too often, because I was not in this camp at all when I was a founder, is we kind of look at who are the most well-known VCs and just go, I'm going to reach out to them. Like their brands are big, so I'm just going to reach out. But the real skill is actually navigating what is a huge capital markets ecosystem. There are tons of different types of pools of money out there, but being able to find the right type of investor for you and target the right people to reach out to is really the first place to start. And then, yes, like if you now have the right fit in terms of, think of it like your ICP, your ideal customer profile for your investors, because you are selling something, you're selling the equity in your business, they're buying it. Figure out who's the right ICP for you. Don't waste your time with the investors that are not a good fit. And then really figure out what those investors are looking for. And in some cases, a lot of investors, if you're not in the quote unquote pedigreed, Silicon Valley, like OpenAI engineer, then there's going to be a different path that is also a very successful, viable path of building a good business. And the question is who are those people and what do you need to get in front of them? So I can't even like address exactly if 1 million ARR is the right number because it's so context dependent as to who you are and who you're targeting and what type of business you are. But there are like some commonalities of what looks great in a lot of different types of businesses. But yeah, I'm struggling to like be very specific because it really depends so much on who you're targeting.
I think that is such a good point. And I love that you talked about ICP. Think about your investors as your ICP as well, because it's something that we don't necessarily do. And I find a lot of founders are coming and they're pitching, but I'm like, you're pitching to a consumer business, by the way. Like they're not going to invest in your tech company. They might know other funds that would, but are they going to take the time to tell you that necessarily? They just won't answer your email.
Exactly.
It's a lot of time wasted, unfortunately. So any other myths that you want to bust about what founders might believe about investors to be true that are not?
I feel like I write a lot of spicy stuff on my LinkedIn sometimes. So there's a couple other ones. One, like, is VC even the right asset class for you? Like, should you be focused on venture at all? The capital markets ecosystem is huge. You could be focused on family offices. You could be focused on grants. I know a startup team that pretty much was funding themselves all off of competitions and grants. You could be focused on the private equity path, which is more focused on profitable companies versus high growth, unprofitable companies. There's a lot of different versions of this. So that's one kind of myth I would bust, is just like that VC is the end all be all answer. Another one I get asked a lot about is like responsiveness from VCs. And one that I guess a myth is that if the VC meets with you, then they're going to follow up with an answer. Like, I mean, maybe that one's not a myth, but like everybody knows VCs ghost people. And so I think that there's the bad behavior that happens, which I think should be the right thing that people should actually do follow through. But then there's the reality of they don't do that. And so what can you do as someone? The myth would be, I guess, resetting the expectation of like, one, of course, there's people you don't want to work with if they go through all of your data and then never respond to you again. I think that's just bad behavior. But if you had one meeting and you were hoping that they were going to follow up with you and they don't, maybe you need to do the follow-up. And I think that's something that I see a lot as people being confused if they were like,
I don't expect to have the initial follow-up be from the founder, right?
I think a lot of founders expect after one
from the VC.
For the VC to be the person following up after the first meeting. I do see that quite a bit.
To me, that's a little bit crazy. That's very entitled.
I think it's an expectation I see. And so I think that's where like the myth might be, don't just expect that they're going to follow up. Some people actually do call that ghosting. So that's one area that I think can be somewhat myth. What are other fun myths of startup land? I think the idea that like once you hit this, these are all fundraising oriented because we're on this topic, but like once you hit the metrics that the VC told you they wanted you to hit, then now they're going to fund. That's not necessarily the case either. It's so much of this is so subjective, and it's about the rate of growth, of the speed of how you got there. It's about how much you fit into the thesis and story that they're trying to tell. It's about how much sway they have in their partnership. They might love you, but maybe they're not able to convince their partnership. There's so many elements like that. So I see that one being another one that frustrates people sometimes.
On that point of the sway with their partners, as people are thinking about the right person at the right fund that they want to get investment from, do you believe that first of all, that exists, right? That there is a right person that you should be going to? Or is it about hierarchy, right? Like, should you be going for the biggest sort of person from a hierarchy perspective at the fund possible?
This is another one that is very controversial because there will be a lot of people who say, oh, no, don't talk to anyone junior at the firm, only talk to the most senior people. And there's some merit in that if you can get the attention of the senior person and they are on board, which is several conditional statements, but if those conditions are all met, then yes, you can have an easier time with the internal approval. But a lot of the hard part is getting their attention, because obviously they're running a big firm and they're senior, and then also getting them to maybe see, because they might be more senior, be more older, they might not see, it depends what startup you are, but they might not see the opportunity and the problem that you're presenting. So I always say, like, the best person to represent you internally to the firm is the person who feels most passionately and most mission aligned about what you're working on. And that is the person that you want to be your champion, because they're going to be the one that goes the most out of their way to advocate on your behalf. But yeah, it's tricky. Another myth I was thinking of too, as we were talking, is around more like post-investment, the portfolio support side of things. I think the last generation of companies, there was a mantra from VCs of like portfolio services. We will, help you with recruiting and engineering and sales and fundraising and all of these various things. I do think fundraising is the one that all VCs should help with. Like, obviously we know a lot more about who are the ICP buyers that might be best fits for you than the average, person. But I might have a slightly like controversial take in that I don't think you want to be relying on your VC for any of the other kind of portfolio services, company building stuff. The reason being, there's a lot of reasons. One, it's always going to be, it's almost like adverse selection. Like when I'm working with a company and they want a lot of help on all of the company building stuff, I have to start to ask myself, and this isn't like introductions or connections or whatever, those are obviously super fine, but in terms of actually being the person doing all of their recruiting for them, if you were to think about that example, that might be like a negative signal of you
know what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Like the talent development and the nose for talent that company has in the market. So my kind of hot take is actually more so, what great founders need is not for me to help build their business. They know how to build their business way better than I do. What I can help them with more so is, they're so busy running their business. How do you maintain and have a life and kind of take care of all of the things more on the human side of like getting the right nutrition, like getting the right exercise, like having childcare, like all of these elements that make you be able to show up and actually run full steam at work, I would rather, and where money is actually the limiting factor on a lot of those things, I would rather put my dollars there and help you kind of really obfuscate away all of the distractions so that you can focus fully on work rather than do your work for you. So that's a kind of hot take on my end, but it's very opposite from what I think you'll hear from a lot of the common VC portfolio help.
And for those portfolio founders that you've seen separate from the pack and really do well and scale and grow their businesses, what are some characteristics that have separated them?
I think there's three things that a seed company needs to get right, and the ones that separate from the pack have gotten all three of these things right. One is the ability to ride on the coattails of a tailwind or a current or a movement that is really driving a lot of maybe behavior change or a new form of adoption in the market. You'll see a lot of VCs write about this, and they'll call them currents or tailwinds or different things. The reason that's so important, and it's the reason VCs are obsessed with your investment having a strong why now, which I also wrote a post about this on my LinkedIn. A why now is really important because it is what gives you a natural liftoff to get beyond. You're a startup. You don't have all the resources that the incumbents have. So in order to build the plane while flying it, you need a crazy huge tailwind to come at your back to give you some wind. And that can look like there's a lot of different things. Sometimes it's a regulatory change. Sometimes it's a new technology adoption. Sometimes it's a new talent base or a new geography that hasn't been attacked. But there's something that happened very recently that didn't happen a couple of years ago that is now giving you a reason for being and giving you specifically a startup reason for being. So the famous phrase that VCs love to hear was, this thing was not possible 1 month ago or 6 months ago or 1 year ago. Up to about maybe 3 to 5 years is about as far as you can stretch it.
This like 25 years ago.
25 years ago, it's like, oh, okay, well, a lot has happened since then. But it's basically in the period of what you would have started a startup around, how long it takes you to get to the next milestone of development, which is normally 2 to 3 years. So this thing was not possible in the last 2 to 3 years. It now is, thanks to X. And I have now built a new solution that builds on top of that. And that is why we are going to succeed. Like, those are the magic words the VCs are looking for that go, okay, I get it. This is right. This is going to be successful.
So you said there were three things, though. You said there was
right.
that tailwind, like the why now.
Yep. The tailwind, the why now, that's a big one. The second one is a nose for AAA talent. So that is, if you think about it, I think one of the most important things a startup can do is concentrate as much high quality talent as they can possibly afford into their startup at the earliest days, because those are the people who build the product. And the difference between A+ and B+ when you're starting out, if you think about it as like the trajectory you're on, that's going to have you off by a difference of like 10 degrees, which 10 degrees in the beginning is not very far. But in the end, that just difference in separation gets wider and wider and wider as you go on. And so that's why also VCs are so obsessed with where they think talent hubs are, which are not always the case. Like, a brand does not make a talent hub. But I do think if you can kind of try and concentrate as much talent, and that can be specific to your business, that's a really important thing. So those are kind of the first two things that I think a seed stage startup really needs to get right.
I couldn't agree more on the talent piece. And I just have to add one thing. The way that I always talk about it is you're trying to beat the market, right? Like, you're trying to not only beat the market, like you're trying to do something that is probably 10x harder. So you're not going to be able to do that with people that are mediocre. You have to do it with the best possible people, because otherwise there's no chance of success.
Yes, 100%.
So important. The third thing, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's and the second one, it connects to the third one too. So the third one is really just shipping velocity. It's the speed of how fast you move, and that one directly relates to how quality of people that you moved into your organization to start with, because the speed at which you ship is the speed at which you learn. The faster you get products out in the market, iterate, understand what was working or not, the faster you're able to learn about it and put out a new version in market. And so a lot of times, one of the questions I ask when I'm evaluating a very early stage startup that doesn't even have revenue is, just tell me a little bit about the last few product sprints that you did. And can you tell me a little bit about your product roadmap, the next 2 to 3 months, what's on your roadmap? And that is so elucidating as to the ambition of the product cycle, the speed of the product cycle, the kind of like upsetness, the kind of like dissatisfaction that the founder has with their product. I love seeing founders who are like, oh, this product, like I wanted all of these new features in here yesterday. Or and I don't want feature bloat. So to be clear, it's more so when they say like, I wanted all of these new things to happen to make the product better. And this is like how I'm getting them out, and this is like the feedback I'm getting. I think that one ties and dovetails to a very like, it's not in my top 3, but the fourth one I would put very closely is, well, how do you know what to ship and how to get it out there? Founders who are obsessed with customers and really have like very, very strong customer voice are also people I love working with. And I think a really strong signal for what you need to get right. I'm not saying you have to build exactly what consumers want. If you asked a consumer what they would have wanted 150 years ago, they would have said a faster horse. They wouldn't have said, I want a car. They just didn't know cars existed. So there is an element of you as the founder of needing to show them a new experience, but you need to tie that new experience to really well understood needs and behaviors and the voice of what the customer wanted. So that one is tied to the product and shipping velocity, which is tied to the talent. And all of those are tied to the why now and the market and the reason for being, because that's what's going to help all of them get lift off.
I want to go back to the traction piece again, because I think everybody on here is probably like, okay, how much traction do I need? And like, if I am pre-revenue, how do I indicate that I'm close to having product market fit or that this is going to work? And I know that you also shared something about a founder needs to be able to say why it's going to work or invest.
I think before product market fit, what you want to display is product market pull. Product market pull is when customers are trying to rip the product out of your hands. It shows up as a combination of explosive behavior change, and it might look like, a wait list, or it might look like a number of times that they're logging into your product, the amount of time, the average daily session that they're spending. It might be the number of days that they return to your product in a row. These are all signals and signs that there's explosive pull. The customers are trying to get the product, even if you're not monetizing it yet. That's fine. And so sometimes you just have prototypes. Sometimes you have the website around the prototype, like the wait list and the showing of what you're building. But those can be very strong signals. And Robinhood famously had raised a Series A before they even launched their product. And obviously they were coming from Stanford and they had some pedigree on that side. But they had a very large wait list. Like I think it was millions. And they started letting on hundreds of thousands early once they released the product. But that was a very strong signal to VCs, and that's why they were able to get in part, one of the reasons why they were able to get their Series A done is because they had such a huge, strong wait list that was generated so fast. Some numbers are just so crazy. You're like, oh, okay, well, even if you haven't built the product yet, it's clear there's something here.
It's going to work.
And also then it backs up with the capability of, can you build it? So Yeah, that's one really big one of how to show before you have product market fit. Another way I frame it is just founders should obsess over engagement and retention data and the cohorts. I love, 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 love cohorts. The early signs that people are coming back, and you're measuring from all of the people who joined in March to all of the people who joined in May to all of the people who joined in June, and so on and so on, looking at each of those monthly cohorts. Is it increasing? Are the metrics increasing the more I go on? Because that would mean that the shipping that you're doing is resonating and showing up in stronger retention and stronger in cohorted engagement levels. So personally, like I invest a lot pre-monetization, and that's where I dig in.
Super helpful. I'm just thinking right now about our own retention and churn metrics and the pace at which we ship. So and I've never heard about shipping velocity in the way that you put it. So super helpful. What about in the pitch process, Mercedes? Like, what do you think makes people really stand out in their pitch? Because you see so many. I mean, can you just quantify for us how many pitches you see to give people context of like how much you guys are inundated with pitches?
Oh my goodness. Well, so I've been an investor for 6 to 7 years, and in venture capital, I used to do investing a long time ago, and that was public markets investing. I calculated this once. I normally meet on average 10, let's call it, founding teams for pitches a week. And per day, you're normally getting inbounded with like 10 to 20 email pitches per week. So if you multiply that across all of the years, let's put it in the email inbox, tens of thousands, and in the face-to-face meeting, thousands of pitches. And so there's a couple of things that I think really separate a great pitch and like a world-class one-of-one pitch from an average pitch. I think first, the things to remember is that a fundraising pitch is an energy transfer. You are trying to infect your listener with the passion and enthusiasm that you feel for the opportunity you see in the market, and so much so that they leave the meeting also with that same level of energy and excitement. It doesn't mean, though, when I say energy, I don't mean you're just excited and you're going, and like moving and gesturing a lot. That energy comes from the combination of clear insights about a market and an opportunity, a gap that other people don't see, that is credible, backed up with data, backed up with resources and proof, that then shows someone, there is money to be made here because there's a gap in the market that people really want, and there's demand for it, and it's credible, and there's data, and I can make money by investing in that. Like, that's really boiling it down to super simple at the end of the day. I have a blog post called Sales is an Energy Transfer. It's also on my LinkedIn somewhere from like a couple of months ago. It might be last year. I forget. But if you look on my website or on my LinkedIn, and it goes a lot deeper into all of the steps and what makes for a great transfer of energy. I think one of the myths about this is people often believe, well, I'm not a storyteller, or I'm not the most extroverted person, so I'm not going to be good at fundraising. And I don't think that's true. Like,
no.
Insights and credibility are far more important than amazing extroversion. Now, storytelling is very helpful because if you think about how us humans have evolved over millions of years, we only had writing tools in the last few percentage of time compared to how long we've been on Earth. The way we communicated information for many millions of years was storytelling and passing things along verbally. So yes, like, it is an important skill set if you can give imagery and visualization and have good cliffhangers and starting and ending points. I'm not great at all of this, by the way. I see a lot of people who are much better, but like it's something you can study and it's something you can kind of figure out and you can practice. And so really what matters though is for being able to compel people to want to lean across the table. You can start to tell by they stop looking at the clock as much, they're less fidgety, they're more still, they're enraptured, they're mimicking all of your gestures when you're talking to them. There's a lot of little signals that the person is leaning in. We all know it. We've all felt it when the person across the table is captivated by what you're saying. And so it's just tapping into that. You can do it very quietly. You can do it with a very small, quiet voice and just be saying things that everybody wants to listen to right now. So I was just like mimicking it right there. But like it's the point is you really don't have to be loud. I think it's just it's an aura.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also if you really believe in your ability to build it. I think a lot of times with female founders, something that I see is that the confidence in what you're able to build or how quickly you're able to ship things or how big it can be is not necessarily there. So on the flip side, Mercedes, can you share a few red flags for pitches like that you see?
Yeah. And that's a great point you brought up about women and our confidence levels, because this is one of the biggest, in addition to the reality of the fact that people don't believe women when they say things, which has been proven in a lot of different studies. It is though, we internalize that and then we act in a way that makes it even more of a downward spiral. And so I think showing up with confidence in yourself and not letting yourself get taken off track by the doubters is super, 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 super important and very difficult to do because it requires staying with a lot of it requires a lot of mental fortitude and a lot of belief in yourself. But sorry, the question you asked was
red flags in pitches, like something where you're like, oh, this is a non-starter, or something like, by the way, confidence and not having, like, you might have an excellent product or an excellent idea and team around you, but if you don't have confidence,
for me,
hurts.
To me, the red flag is anything that causes me to not trust the numbers or lose credibility in the numbers. And this is a place where people lose credibility in what's being said even. I'll just leave it at that. A lot of people are prone to hyperbole, exaggeration, and making things sound a little bit better than they are. Like we all do it. It's natural. You're trying to present your best self forward, but a lot of people are very trained to catch that as investors. And so there's this balance of how do you strike being confident and showing your best self with also being super credible and without like downplaying and diminishing and making it sound super small. It's really a hard balance to strike. I'd say the other red flag I have this thing I call the vulnerability confidence trade-off, is when people are trying to they're trying to decide, is this a moment where I am vulnerable and actually say I don't know, or do I just act confident and try and barrel through? I think it's another myth if it's a perceived trade-off. I think you can do both at once. You can display confidence while also saying I don't know, and that I think trips people up a lot. But a good way to do it is when an investor asks you a question and you don't know the answer. The red flag is when you barrel through it and it's very clear you had no idea what was being talked about. And if you do it once, it's not a full red flag, depends what the topic was. But if you do it a couple of times, it starts to be a red flag because it goes back to that like losing credibility. And so the confident way to get through it, but also answer it concretely, is to say, okay, try to map it to something that you think you might know. For example, the example I give a lot is like CAC or something. You know, people ask, what's your CAC? And you're like, so CAC, customer acquisition cost. If you don't know what CAC stands for, just clarify. That would be the first step. If you know if we're talking about customer acquisition cost, then go to, okay, well, this is how, if you don't know the exact number, say, well, how I think I would calculate it, and you kind of workshop it live with the person right there. You go, so are we talking about all of the marketing spend divided by all of the customers that were acquired in that month or something? You can make up literally whatever you think it is targeted towards, and then you can get people to and this is uncomfortable to do sometimes, which is why people don't do it, and they just say a number. But like, and maybe they don't know if that number was right, but if you walk through people and you go, okay, well, last month we spent 15,000 and we got, 15,000 customers, so CAC was $1. I don't know, that's just like an example, but that would be one way to do it, instead of going CAC. Oh yeah, CAC is super low, like, not an issue for us at all. Like, we don't spend anything on marketing. Then they go, okay, so what did you spend on marketing last month? And you go, oh, well, we spent 15,000. You go, oh, so you are spending money on marketing. They go, yeah. Oh, but you just said we didn't spend money on marketing. Like, that's a small thing where 15,000, of course, doesn't sound like a ton of money, but you get into this thing where all of a sudden now you've lost credibility because you weren't maybe sure exactly what the question was. And so that's just something I see as a red flag, that happens quite a lot. The other one is like saying, oh, the round's closing like today, like if you don't get in now, like, you're out, type of thing. It's kind of like, okay, fine. that's not gonna work.
Right. Well, on that point, like quickly on when you're talking about creating urgency, right? How do you create urgency for an investor when maybe you don't have everybody lined up, but you're like, I really need to get this investor on the line?
Okay, because my answer would have been to line people up strategically, in terms of like what I think we give this advice in Y Combinator a lot, but is to set a date that you want to kick off the fundraise, and then prepare for that date a couple, like 1 to 2 months in advance, where you tell people, hey, and you go to a list, you tier out your investors in terms of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, based on how well they fit your ICP, how interested they've been in you, etc. And you let them all know that you're going to, or you sometimes only let your tier 1s or tier 2s. There's a decision point here. Do you want to let your best potential customers, as in the buyers of your equity, know then practice that you're going to be raising first, or do you want to practice on a subset? A lot of people actually like to practice on their tier 2 to make sure their story gets a little bit better before they go to their tier 1. But let's say you triage them into that, and then you tell them, hey, the fundraise is going to kick off in 2 months. Let me know if you would like to meet beforehand, or maybe you say 1 month, and then watch how people separate. Do people go, okay, let's talk in 2 months? Or do they say, let's talk right now. This is what you've emailed me. These bullet points are super exciting. Or do they not reply at all? You resort and re-rank people that way, but you have this lineup where you're gearing up to, and you're moving up to a fundraise, that something could happen ahead of time, that's the urgency you created, that the person doesn't have to wait until it officially kicks off.
Love that. Oh, such good advice, because you don't want to be in a position where you have no one, and then you're talking to your top potential investor and they're like, who else is invested? And you're like, I'm just kicking it off. That's what I feel like you hear a lot of.
Yeah.
Mercedes, this is so helpful. I do have one more question for you, or actually it's kind of 2-part. And one is, what's next for you? And 2 is, what do you see right now happening in the landscape for women when it comes to venture capital? I know that's a big question, the second one.
Yeah. So the first one, I recently announced I'm stepping back from Lightspeed, where I've been for 6 years. It's been an incredible run. I had such an amazing time there. I am pursuing an entrepreneurial path. I'm getting ready to start a new VC firm. And so that is something I'm working on in the background. And then in terms of advice for, or what I'm seeing in terms of the market for female founders right now.
Yeah.
It's a tough market. It's a tough market for a lot of folks. I really think the world has separated into like these high growth AI companies and everybody else. I
Yeah.
think that the thing I get excited about for female founders is that there's more female investors than ever, which are twice as likely, the research shows, to invest in female founders. So I think we're positively headed on that direction. I think the other thing I'm excited about for female founders is that it's easier than ever with the AI tools to create new experiences, and that we can create experiences that cater just to us as women. I invested in a women's cycle syncing app that takes your menstrual cycle, and they use AI to line up and recommend, based on your hormonal monthly fluctuations, what's the best type of activities for you every month. And I don't know if that could have been created, 10 years ago. I think these type of companies are increasingly focused on the women user and using the latest AI tools to make it even easier to lean into ourselves. So that's what I'm really excited about for this next wave.
I don't know why my text messages are coming through because I'm on do not disturb. So apologies. Dings there. But this has just been such rich information. Like I never take notes during these sessions. I'm taking notes because I want to make sure they're recorded. But I really appreciate the time, Mercedes. Again, everybody, we have our tech cohort opening where we're going to be having discussions like these because let's face it, in real time, everything in the landscape is changing right now. So we really do need to share information with one another. And then we're also going to be doing a pitch demo with Jessie Draper, which is pretty cool. If you guys all know Jessie from Halogen Ventures. But we're going to try to be bringing a lot of these intimate VC conversations to you because it does feel like sort of a walled garden and we want to demystify things. And so these Mythbusters too, that was so fun. And I so appreciate you partaking in that. But yeah, I hope everybody is doing well. Happy summer. And thank you all for joining us. And thanks again, Mercedes. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.